The age you think you should have figured it out by isn't a fact about you. It's a guess, and 80% of the country happened to guess the same number. In the 1960s, a researcher named Bernice Neugarten asked a simple question over and over to hundreds of adults. What's the right age to be married, to have kids, to hit your stride at work? She expected scattered answers because that's what you'd expect from a question with no correct answer written anywhere. She got the opposite. More than 80% of people landed within 5 years of each other, not because anyone compared notes, and not because anyone sat down and decided on a number together, because everyone was quietly measuring against the same invisible ruler, without ever agreeing to use it, and without ever noticing they'd picked it up. You've probably done the math yourself. Maybe this morning, you wake up, it's your birthday, and before your feet hit the floor, your phone is already lit up. An old classmate got engaged. Someone from your graduating class got promoted to director. You do the subtraction without meaning to. How old they are, how old you are, how far apart the two columns land, and something in your chest tightens before you've even had coffee. That tightness isn't proof of anything. It's you running a comparison against a number nobody actually verified. A guess that 80% of strangers happen to guess the same way, mistaken somewhere along the line for a fact. Epictetus had a name for exactly this. Confusing what belongs to other people's opinions with what actually belongs to you. And your own timeline, it turns out, belongs to you a lot more than the 80% would like you to believe. That number does more than sit quietly in your head. It runs your body. You've been to the wedding where everyone agrees the couple looks happy and you still catch yourself doing the math anyway. Older than you expected, later than the timeline said it should have happened. The marriage itself isn't the problem. Nobody in that room thinks it's a problem. But somewhere underneath the toast, a second calculation is running that has nothing to do with how happy they actually are. That calculation turns out to be measurable. A study published in 2024 tracked people who married later than their culture's expected age and found something that shouldn't be possible if timing were just a neutral detail. They showed higher rates of depressive symptoms after the wedding, even when the marriage itself was just as strong as anyone else's. Same happiness. Same relationship quality. Worse outcome, purely because of when it happened relative to the schedule everyone had quietly agreed on without ever discussing it. Which means your mind is keeping two separate scorecards, one for how your life is actually going, one for how close it is to on time. And the second scorecard can generate real physical distress completely independent of the first. You could be doing well by every measure that matters, checking every box you actually care about and still feel like something's wrong. Not because your life is off, because the thing being graded was never your happiness. It was your timing, against a schedule you never agreed to. I've sat at a friend's celebration doing arithmetic that had nothing to do with them, genuinely happy for them, and running a private subtraction in the background the entire time. Rude math on the inside at somebody else's good news, which would almost be fine if what happened next when you fall behind schedule was actually a problem. You know the feeling. Sitting in a job that still technically works, in a life that still technically adds up on paper, and thinking, quietly, is this actually it? Not a crisis you can point to on a calendar. No single bad thing happened. Just a low, steady static underneath the ordinary days that says you're behind, and getting further behind every month you stay still and don't do anything about it. You've probably been told what that static means, that it's a warning sign, proof you took a wrong turn somewhere and the bill is finally coming due. Get it together, catch up, stop wasting whatever time you've got left before it's too late to fix. A psychologist named Oliver Robinson spent years studying exactly that feeling and mapped it into 5 distinct phases. It starts with feeling trapped, going through the motions of a job, a relationship, a life, on something close to autopilot, while a quieter part of you keeps a running tally of how much of it you'd actually choose again. Then, a growing certainty that something has to change, loud enough that staying still starts to feel like the riskier option. Then the actual break, the job you quit, the relationship you end, the plan you finally admit isn't yours. A stretch of rebuilding that looks, from the outside, like falling apart. And then a life on the other side of it that resembles nothing you were so afraid of losing. He found it concentrated hardest around age 30, which happens to be exactly the age most people have already privately decided they were supposed to have it figured out by. It shows up with the same intensity researchers see in a midlife crisis decades later. The same insecurity, the same low mood, the same sense of running out of runway. Except nobody's built a sympathetic word for the 30-year-old version yet. And when he followed up years later with the people who'd gone through it, roughly 80% described it as a good thing, not a detour from the plan. The thing that actually got them a life worth wanting, one they wouldn't have found by staying on schedule. Which is close to the opposite of what the feeling seems to be telling you while you're stuck inside it. The restlessness isn't proof that you're falling behind schedule. For most people, according to Robinson's own follow-up interviews, it's the mechanism that gets them unstuck before staying still becomes the actual mistake. The discomfort doing exactly the job it evolved to do, years before you'd ever describe it that generously. I spent a stretch of my late 20s treating that restlessness like a verdict. Proof I'd wasted the decade, proof everyone else had somehow gotten a memo I'd missed. I compared myself to people who looked settled and assumed they knew something I didn't. Turns out I wasn't behind. I was just early into the part where you're supposed to feel exactly that, on the way to somewhere better than where staying put would have landed me. Which is a strange thing to already understand, because a man on the wrong end of the exact same clock understood it 2,000 years ago. Seneca was in his 60s, one of the most powerful men in Rome, decades past the age anyone would expect him to be sitting in a classroom, and he started showing up to a lecture hall full of teenagers. He wrote to his friend Lucilius about it, half bracing for the joke he knew was coming. A fine time of life for that, he imagines Lucilius saying. The same thing you'd probably say if a relative in his 60s told you he'd started sitting in on college lectures, and instead of defending himself, instead of explaining why it was different for a man of his standing, he just refuses the premise entirely. You should keep learning as long as you are ignorant, he writes, even to the end of your life, not a comforting platitude, a flat rejection of the idea that age comes with a closing bell on who's allowed to start something. The same closing bell you've probably been assuming applies to you, without ever checking whether Seneca or anyone else actually signed off on it. Then he does something sharper. He turns to Lucilius, who was younger, and tells him to hurry, precisely because Seneca himself had waited. Wisdom, he says, doesn't arrive the way money does, or titles, or influence. Those can land on you by accident, handed over by circumstance whether you did anything to deserve them or not. Wisdom only comes to people who actually go get it. There's no version of simply getting older that delivers it to your door for free, no matter how long you wait for it to show up on its own. This wasn't a young man's theory, untested by his own life. This was one of the most senior statesmen in the Roman world. At the literal far end of the timeline, everyone else was supposedly failing to keep up with, publicly starting over in a room full of people who could have been his own children, and treating it as unremarkable enough to mention only in passing in a letter about his week, like it barely counted as news. 2,000 years later, there's a strange footnote to that letter. It's about the exact date you keep dreading. Go back to that birthday morning, phone lighting up before your feet hit the floor, the classmate's engagement, the old co-worker's promotion, the private subtraction you ran before you'd even had coffee. You've been treating that date as a scoreboard, a checkpoint where the universe tallies up whether you're on pace or not. Turns out your own brain treats that exact date very differently, as one of the most reliable reset buttons it has access to. Researchers who study motivation notice something odd about how people actually start things. Not on a random Tuesday for no particular reason. Right after what they call a temporal landmark, the start of a new week, a new month, a new year, the first day back after a holiday. Anything that marks a clean line between a before and an after gets treated by the mind as a natural place to leave the old version of yourself behind and begin again with a lighter account. Birthdays, including the milestone ones you've been dreading, show up on that exact same list. When people were asked which dates felt like the start of something new, a 30th birthday scored right up there with New Year's Day. Not because it's objectively more significant than any other Tuesday, but because the mind had already been primed to treat it that way, the same way it treats January 1st. Which means the date you've been experiencing as proof you're behind is, mechanically, the same date your own mind is primed to use as permission to start. Same 24 hours, same phone lighting up with the same news about the same people from your graduating class. The only thing that changes which one you get is which story you hand that date the moment it arrives. and nobody's actually forcing you to hand it the story where it counts against you. I used to dread my own birthday a little, not dramatically, just a low hum underneath the cake, a feeling like the day was quietly grating me. Now I mostly just use it as an excuse to start something I'd been putting off, which is a considerably better use of one day a year than sitting there doing math about people I graduated with. 2,000 years apart, and Seneca and a stack of behavioral researchers landed on the same idea from opposite directions. He argued it philosophically, that age carries no real authority over who's allowed to begin. They found it in the data, that the mind doesn't actually care what a landmark means, only that it's been told the landmark means something. Assign it "you're behind," and it delivers dread. Assign it "clean slate," and it delivers exactly that instead. The date was never the one making the decision. You were, the whole time, without realizing there was a decision to make. Which means there's an actual unglamorous way to use that. Right after a landmark, a new week, a new year, a birthday, researchers found something almost embarrassingly simple. Gym visits jump by about a third in the days immediately following the start of a new week compared to an ordinary Wednesday with nothing marking it. Not because anyone suddenly became more disciplined overnight, not because willpower spiked out of nowhere, because the calendar handed them a line, and something in the mind used that line to file the version of themselves who kept skipping the gym under "before" and started fresh on the other side of it without needing to earn the fresh start first. That's the whole mechanism, not motivation, permission. The mind needs a landmark to organize around, a place to set the old, stalled version of you down. And it turns out it isn't picky about which landmark you give it. A birthday works. So does a Monday. So does today, if you decide it counts. The researchers found the same pattern held for people quitting a diet they'd already broken, for people finally starting a project they'd been circling for months, for almost anything a person had been putting off, waiting for the right time to feel true. The right time was never a fact waiting to be discovered. It was a line somebody had to draw. Which means the actual move isn't to stop caring about age or to talk yourself out of noticing the calendar. It's the opposite. Pick the landmark. Let it be a real dividing line, on purpose, instead of one you back into by accident every time a classmate posts something that makes your stomach drop. Start the thing on the other side of it, not because you've caught up to anyone or closed some gap that was never real to begin with, because the date gave you a reason to. And reasons like that don't come around asking whether you deserve them first. They just arrive, the same as they always have, and wait to see what story you decide to hand them. So go back to that birthday morning one more time. Phone lighting up, the classmate's engagement, the old coworker's promotion. You do the subtraction out of habit before you've even had coffee, and then you catch yourself doing it. And for maybe the first time, you get to choose what that particular morning actually means. Not evidence you're behind a schedule 80% of strangers happen to agree on by accident decades before you were even born. The day permission got handed to you, whether you asked for it or not, whether you noticed it or not. If a man in his 60s, one of the most powerful figures in Rome, could walk into a room full of teenagers and treat it as barely worth mentioning in a letter about his week, you can survive turning another year older? The clock was never against you. It just needed you to stop checking it for permission you already had.